Welcome back to Happiness Habitat. I'm here joined by a really good friend, Leona Fallas. Leona, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to explore your craftsmanship, your work. You're a sex therapist, a very taboo, I think industry. A lot of people don't really talk about sex. Can you start out by just, what is sex therapy?
Great question. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Sex therapy, the thing I've heard or that people assume who maybe haven't been to sex therapy or don't know a lot about sex therapy, they're like, do you have sex with your clients? No, absolutely not.
Oh, no.
Psychotherapy never involves sex. It's a space where if people have something about their sex life that they would like to explore, grow in, or heal, like sexual trauma, sexual dysfunction, a couple that is maybe struggling to communicate their wants or needs or desires with each other, it's a space where we can support people to work on that.
Okay, amazing. So how does one know, though, right? Like, how do you know if you're a candidate for therapy? Because I think as humans, we can get in our own way or think that things are normal, right? Like if a couple is only having sex once a week, once a year, twice a day, how does one know, okay, I think I should go see a sex therapist? And also off of that, like, how do you know what's right or wrong?
Yeah, healthy sex is consensual and congruent with your values. And that's it. And so that means healthy sex is going to look really different for every person, every couple. But consent goes a little broader than just, may I have sex with you? Yes, you can, right? Like consent has to be informed. So, for example, if someone is having an affair and their partner doesn't know about that, right? Now, the partner who doesn't know about the affair, they're no longer able to really consent to the sex they're having with their partner because they don't know that there's another person's health status that could be impacting them, right? That person might not choose to have sex with their partner if they knew that person was acting out with somebody else. I think a person would know they're a good candidate for sex therapy if they carry shame around sex. And this can come from trauma, this can come from religion and upbringing, this can come from culture. If someone thinks that there's something about their sexuality is just not quite right, and that can range from like, are the things that turn me on normal? I don't know. And I don't really talk about it with my friends or my partner because I'm like sort of embarrassed or ashamed about what that might
Interesting.
be. Or someone might say, oh, it takes me a long time to have an orgasm, or I've never had an orgasm. But some people come into sex therapy not because anything's wrong. It's sort of like working out at the gym with a personal trainer. They've decided.
Love that.
Yeah, they're really passionate about this area of their life and the capacity for connection with their partner, and they're just trying to optimize it.
That's beautiful. That is so well said. Like, that makes me want to go to sex therapy. I love having a trainer, right? Like, someone to keep you motivated, someone to learn from, right? Someone to work through issues with. Tell me about tell me about just what is the normalcy of a sex life? Like, how important is having a sex life to one's human experience?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Some people who have a spiritual practice who believe that the human body was designed intentionally, there's things to notice about the human body that might imply that our designer or our creator intended for us to have sexual pleasure, right? Mm-hmm. Like the clitoris, its only function is sexual pleasure. Why is that there if women's bodies were not designed to experience tremendous amounts of pleasure?
Interesting. Well, what do you mean by that? Because when someone has sex, is the goal, well, what is your idea of sex? Is it just purely reproduction, or is it to also enjoy and connect.
If sex was purely for reproduction, then why would we have a clitoris?
You're right.
It's not required for reproduction. The idea that sex is only penetration is a really common view and belief. Like, if you've ever heard someone, like, if you've ever had a conversation with a girlfriend and you go, oh, did you guys have sex? And they go, no, we did everything but. Well, I might consider that everything but also sex.
Interesting.
It's sort of a heteronormative idea that the only sex is when you put a penis in a vagina.
But that's not necessarily what sex just is.
Right. Because then how do two women have sex, or how do two men
You're
have
right.
sex? Right.
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
Is there a normalcy of, I have so many questions, Kai. Is there a normalcy for how often?
Like, how much is normal?
Yeah,
Is
like,
that the
if someone
question?
should have sex? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, there is no number of, like, if you are not having sex this often, then you don't have, like, a good or a robust or a healthy sex life.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, because it varies so much, like, by person or by couple, the metric is really, are you having sex as often as you want to have sex?
Love that.
And if there's been a change in your libido, do you have an explanation for why that might have been? So if you used to be a person who wants to have sex once a week, and now it's been 2 years and you haven't wanted to have sex, do you know why that might be? Is it...
What if that person's unbothered?
And they might be unbothered.
And that's totally healthy.
So then it's not a problem.
Wow.
Unless... Because sex is so intimate when it comes to a relationship or a partnership, that person might be unbothered. If their partner is also unbothered, now you don't have a problem, right? But if their partner is bothered, then you have what we would call a high libido, low libido pairing. And that's when someone with a really high sex drive and a person with really low sex drive get into a relationship. And this is like one of the most common reasons couples seek out sex therapy.
Wow. I have a statistic here about that. According to Psychology Today, research shows that sexual desire discrepancies or mismatched libidos occur in roughly 50% of couples at some point in their relationship.
Yeah.
That is high.
It is high.
What do you, if someone doesn't have a sex therapist and doesn't necessarily have the means to go out and, work with someone, how does that couple get over that hump? Because I can imagine that creates frustrations or conflict, right?
Absolutely. You don't have to go to a couples therapist or a sex therapist to work on that. If each person is able to sort of be self-aware and investigate, like, where that might have been coming from. A metaphor I use with clients all the time is, there's a therapist, Terry Gorski, and he references his friend Brian, who got a cat, and he calls Terry complaining about the cat. The cat is, like, knocking water off of the counter and, like, hiding behind the curtains and doesn't want to cuddle and doing all these, like, cat-like behaviors. Brian calls Terry, like, complaining about the cat, and Terry goes, that's what cats do. And Brian goes, well, my dog never did that. And so if you entered a relationship with a person who's always been a low desire person, and then it's 2 years in the relationship and you're resentful and you're asking this person, why do you never initiate sex? Well, they're a cat. They've always been a cat. This is a low desire person.
Amazing.
And sometimes people get into relationships with the expectation their partner is going to violate their fundamental nature to meet their needs. And it's sort of a bizarre expectation. You wouldn't get a cat and expect them to be a dog. So if that's always been the case, that one person has been high libido and one person has been low libido, that's pretty hard to work out on your own. Like, that's when I would say maybe someone should look into couples therapy, sex therapy. But if someone had high desire and then that went away, it could be for so many reasons. It could be a medication side effect. It could be they don't know how to advocate for the type of sex that they find pleasurable. And if sex hurts or doesn't feel good, why would you want to do it? Right? And then there can be some sort of, like, body exploration as a couple of like, for the low libido partner, what really feels good for you? What can we do to make this experience as exciting as possible so that it's more interesting, more appetizing to you?
What's a good way for, let's say, the high libido person to help motivate the person who's, let's say, was never really that interested in sex, or they don't care as much, right? Like, what's a good way for that partner to create those like healthy experiences to at least create the bridge?
Such a good question. There's a book by Emily Nagoski called Come As You Are.
Nice.
Such a good
Great
book.
title.
I know, it's a great title. And the cover is like a little pouch you'd put in your purse, and it's sort of unzipped. It's like a little tongue-in-cheek. And she talks about learning what are your ons and what are your offs.
Okay.
And then working together to like turn on the ons and turn off the offs. So for some people, it could be that when they're stressed out, they don't feel quite so aroused. And things that they find stressful are really bright lights and having to make a lot of decisions. So if your partner knows this about you and they get home a little before you, then they can turn off the big light and they can light candles.
Wow.
Lamp set up, right? And they can have dinner already cooked and set up. And they can create an environment that turns off some of the offs to allow some space for eroticism to flow.
Such a good idea.
Yeah.
I feel like you almost need to make like a workbook for couples. I'm sure it exists, maybe. I don't know. For couples to be like, hey, let's figure out first our drive, our sexual drive. Okay, now let's figure out our turn-ons turned off. Let's figure out, all the things. And then here's what we can do based off this information to meet each other in the middle. Yes. I think for me, already what I've learned from you is the eye-opening of that if sex was just to make babies, then why does the female have the clitoris? Or, why is there that enjoyable part? That is something I never connected the dots on. I think that's so interesting. And speaking of just pleasure as well, I kind of want to dive deeper into this and I know I just brought it up downstairs a little bit, but I once studied from this person named Jaya who talks about these sexual blueprints in which everyone has their own interests in how they like to have sex. Is it sexual? Are they sensual? Are they spiritual, kinetic, kinky, right? And if there is a partner that is, let's say, kinky and there's one that's sensual, like, you have to learn how to bridge the gap. And I feel like, okay, we just learned that there's the 50% of couples at some point have a discrepancy with their libidos. Well, I wonder what this discrepancy is, right?
Such a good question.
Like, how does one even get to know what they like more? Yeah. And then bridge the gap with their partner. Or if they're just dating, how do you create, like, another example, right? Well, if you're just starting to date, and you're at the stage where it's now, okay, you're getting much closer, and now it's time to explore sexually. Let's have sex. Well, imagine all the relationships that might just be turned off because, we didn't have a good sex, right? But if only we could speak our truth and know what we liked and communicated that to our partner, okay, maybe things would be better. Are there ways to, I guess, work on that or figure that out with yourself and work with your partner?
People can sometimes be so afraid to tell somebody that they're getting to know through the dating process. Like, this is what I like sexually. Like, this is the kink or fetish that's exciting to me. Like, this is the role or dynamic I like to play in bed, right? But if shame keeps you silent about those things, then you could end up choosing a partner and building a life with somebody who's not compatible with you in that way.
Interesting.
And if sex is a very important component part of your life, then you might reach a point where you have to choose between your life partner and the life you've built together and getting to fully embody your sexuality in a way that is authentic to you.
Interesting.
So if I could give advice to anybody who is like currently dating, it's like in the first few dates, it's okay to have conversations about your sexual template, your sexual values, like what turns you on and the kind of sex you like to have. And I think some people think those conversations are reserved for like casual dating, But I would actually say if you're looking for a life partner, those conversations are like even more important to have.
That's a great point. And I think, yeah, this hopefully people hearing this feel that it's okay to have those conversations earlier on, because especially if that's something super important to you, you don't want to be let down by the time you get on your knee, you know?
Right.
You want to make sure you're aligned. I mean, there's always obviously progress. There's always room to grow. So of course, you know, there's always beautiful things that can be worked on, but that's very interesting. Can sex also I'm loving this conversation.
Me too.
Good to know everyone. Leona and I were really good friends, and I don't think we ever really talk about sex. So this is just so fun to do. It's great.
Yeah.
Does like someone's sex life, a couple or, you know, someone that's been in marriage for a long time, do you find that older couples tend to lose that drive? Why is that? Because that's what we hear, right? The older people get, they're like, it's been a year, like it's been a few months. Why is that? And is that okay for the relationship? Should humans be focused on their sex life more, right? Like,
okay, that's really interesting that you say that. There's some couples that as they age, they're empty nesters. Maybe the woman's entering menopause. Now they don't have to worry about birth control. There's no kids in the house. They get to be spontaneous. Like there's some people later in life who are having the best sex of their life.
That's awesome.
STI rates at like kind of senior living facilities are higher than college campuses.
No way.
So there are people
Wow.
who, as they age, who are full on embracing their sexuality, and maybe they reach a point where they think, I'm going to die of something else before I die of an STI. I don't have to worry about that, right? And there's Viagra and all this stuff to sort of support sexuality as you're aging. But early in a relationship, and this can last from 3 months to 2 years, there's a limerence phase, which is like a honeymoon phase, right? And this is that like early relationship energy. You're so excited about them. You have like rose-colored glasses on. You want to tear each other's clothes off, right? If a couple doesn't know how to transition after that wears off, because it does wear off, then their sexual connection might taper off. It's sort of like if you picture like a roaring fire versus like kind of a rumbling ember. So for couples, it can look different, like the kind of sex they might have might look different. But if the limerence phase wears off and now neither of them really have interest in sex with each other anymore, I would start to wonder what else is happening in the relationship.
Interesting. So basically how I'm understanding it is, of course, very normal. Sparks are flying. You first start, you know, yes, be my boyfriend, be my girlfriend. We are together. But then things start simming down. And from what I've just learned is, okay, maybe there are things that we need to pick back up.
Yeah.
What are some of those things that like are pretty common that you've learned? Or
so when we set a boundary, right? A boundary is a very clearly communicated, like, this is how I feel when this happens. This is what I request instead. And boundaries have consequences. Like, if that doesn't happen, here's what I'm going to do about it, right? And if I don't set boundaries, if I participate in my boundaries being violated and walked all over, like if my partner wants to go to dinner at his parents' house every week, and instead of voicing that I don't enjoy that, I just shut up and go along with it. Now, I'm building a resentment. There's nothing less erotic than a resentment, right? So that could be something that's building up between a couple. Something else is the mental load. The mental load is like all the mental and emotional labor that traditionally women, but it could be any partner, put into a household, and especially when there's kids. And when you're doing that all by yourself, there can be resentment and there can also be fatigue. Those are kind of two big examples, but it could be so many things that don't make you feel particularly generous towards your partner, that don't feel you motivated to selflessly give pleasure, or don't make you feel trusting to open yourself up and be vulnerable and receive.
Does sex therapy, like going to a sex therapist, do you also get to work on communicating each other's boundaries or like feelings of not like distrust or like, you said you were going to do this, you didn't, and like going into the deeper rooted issue?
You have to. You
Yeah.
have to go into all of that. Like, if you can imagine like the pipes of a house as a metaphor for like the channel where eroticism and arousal and attraction can flow. If you have these things like resentments clogging up the pipes, then yeah, in therapy we have to unclog them, and sometimes that's all it takes.
So sex therapy really is, you're getting down to the root of the issue. That's all it is. Like, you need to get to the root of the issue so we can make sure you are fulfilled in this bucket.
People think, I don't know where this idea comes as a society, that like sex is the exception. Like, couples will come in and say, our relationship is perfect. The only problem is in the bedroom. And that is like never the case.
Oh, yeah.
That what is happening in the bedroom is always a symptom of what is happening in the rest of the room. Sometimes you can compartmentalize it, so that's where you see the most symptoms. But like, no, it's just so rarely the case that everything is perfect besides the sex. It's just a part of your relationship.
It's a part of it,
any
right?
other part.
And it's so, I mean, if you look at the whole of the pie, well, it's part of the pie.
It's part of the pie.
I've also never looked at it like that. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about too just the mindfulness, because we talk about, okay, aside of I have my boundaries, I have all of these things that, have me feeling the type of way in the bedroom. Looking at the mindfulness of a human going into that act, right? Like we hear on like movies or TVs, like, oh, I was thinking of this girl, I was thinking of this guy. Like, how does one stay mindful? That's such an important part of it.
Yeah.
Especially for females. We need way more, at least in my experience, to enjoy sex than men.
Yeah.
Right?
You think of the sexual response cycle that like starts with arousal and then builds up to a plateau and then a climax, and then sort of that like afterglow, which is sort of like the pillow talk or the like aftercare, right? This spectatoring, which is what you're sort of describing, of like anxious thoughts, like thinking of, how do I taste? What do I smell like? And how do I look from this angle? Am I doing a good enough job? Are they enjoying it enough? That like interrupts the build up that mountain towards the peak or the climax. And same for men or people with penises. The best tool you have to counteract something like premature ejaculation or delayed ejaculation is mindfulness. And the way you do that is stay present in your five senses. So if every time you're having sort of an anxious thought that comes in and interrupts, if you can ground yourself in, okay, what can I smell right now? What can I taste right now? Where is my partner's hands on me? And what do I feel on my skin from that touch? Like, that's a way to ground yourself back into your body. But also, I think it's a shame when couples don't have the kind of open communication where you can sometimes say, hey, I found my mind wandering a little bit, and can we just take a beat so that I can like recenter for a moment, and then we can resume. Like, they sort of suffer and fight that like internal battle by themselves.
Yeah.
Where in a relationship, you're allowed to like make eye contact and have 5 breaths together, which can be so grounding.
Beautiful. That's so beautiful. And I think, too, I would love for you to talk more about just sex in the bedroom, really starting in the beginning of the day. Because I've heard this before.
You did your research.
Yeah. I also have a fiance, and I like to make, things are good. So I would love for you to explain, because I'm not the sex therapist, you are, the importance, if you want to have a good sex life, you want to have great sex at the end of the day, whatever time of the day, starting at the beginning of the day. And I think you know what I mean.
The brain is the number 1 sex organ. You can imagine if I wake up in the morning and me and my partner are bickering, and then I have a really stressful day at work, and then I come home and the house is a mess, that I'm not feeling particularly aroused, interested in sex, generous towards my partner, right? This is a habit that some people maybe fall out of after the limerence phase ends. It doesn't come
After the sparks.
automatically
Yeah.
after the sparks. To kind of like flirt with your partner, right? This can be as simple as like sending a text message that is like thinking wild thoughts about you, like fire emoji. It doesn't have to be some crazy like intricate thing. And you learn what is the kind of thing that turns on your partner. Like, do they like praise? Do they like compliments? Do they like romance and softness?
Like the 5 love languages, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, what are the ways that you let them know that you're thinking about them? You can sort of plant a seed and say something like, this is what I'm imagining we do later. And that could take place or not actually take place, but it sort of just sets the tone of what's to come. But it's a misconception, I think, that you can have your like normal, regular day that is totally devoid of sensuality, and that all of a sudden, like bedtime's going to roll around at 10 p.m. and all of a sudden you're going to be like in the mood to have sex.
Yeah, that doesn't.
It's an odd idea.
And I think there's a lot of people that, you know, when you're in a relationship, you have 2 individual experiences, right? And so if the man or the woman is having a completely beautiful day and then their partner is having a stressful day but not speaking up vulnerably of like, today was so stressful and here's the things, and then you get to the bedroom and the husband wants to have sex and she didn't tell him why she's not in the mood, it becomes a whole entire argument.
For sure.
Of like, we don't have sex, we're not, you know. So I think communication really plays a role into that.
I think something people might forget is how vulnerable it is to initiate sex. And like, sometimes someone tries to sidestep that vulnerability by like making a vulgar joke or honking a boob, or like initiating in a way that isn't really initiating. So if they get rejected, they don't have to feel rejected. And so, yeah, if you know early in the day, like, hey, this has been a stressful day, or like, we haven't even really talked about like sexual dysfunction, but like if you have pain with sex and you're having a particularly high pain day and you know sex isn't going to be on the table that day, right? Like, yeah, of course you can communicate that with your partner rather than feel so embarrassed about that they sort of initiate and then you sort of like try to find a way to get out of it or make a joke. Like, yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, communication at the barrier is everything, right? And then acceptance of that too from the other partner of like, okay, I hear you, I see you, let's work on this together, versus feeling offended or why me? Why are you doing this to me? You know, I think there's a lot of people that can be selfish in that way.
Yeah.
So it's really just about, you're in a partnership, you know, it's about being there for one another. What about in the situations where they're not there for one another and the person gets so upset and decides, okay, I'm cheating on you, I need to fulfill my sexual desires elsewhere? What does that look like for a couple even coming back? Like, is that even a possibility?
Yeah.
Is that why does this happen so often? Because if someone's this always has confused me. Cheating is the worst thing anyone can do for their own self, for their partners, for their loved ones. And it's a sign of disrespect to yourself and everyone. So why is it that people are cheating? It's like, you might as well leave the person. Why are you cheating?
Esther Perel has a really great book called The State of Affairs. And she writes about sort of these vignettes of like different people who have cheated in their relationships, most of whom do not want to leave their partner. They don't want to end their relationship. We talked about boundaries, right? Mm-hmm. Like being able to voice what you want.
And consent, right?
And consent, right? So like, if I'm unable to voice what I need from my partner, and I'm not feeling attended to, I'm not feeling loved, and I'm not feeling desired. And then my coworker is giving me all of that attention and affection and desire that I'm craving from my partner. Perhaps that's so intoxicating because it brings me back to this missing part of myself that I've lost access to for who knows how many years. That can feel like sexy and feminine and empowered. Yeah. And perhaps what I really want at the end of the day is to get that from my partner, but I don't know how to ask for it. Like that can be one situation. Like one situation can be like there's something you want to do in bed, but you're eroticized, like your template of what turns you on has been so corrupted by pornography or media or family that you don't know how to have sex and intimacy at the same time. So the only way you know how to have your sexual needs met is through like cheating or one night stands. Or,
that's trauma. That's having dealt with trauma.
Could be trauma.
Not understanding. Wow.
So like each case of infidelity is so unique. You really have to like find out like, is this a new thing for you, or have you cheated in every relationship since you were 14? What was the part of you that was missing that you got to get back in touch with through this event? I work sometimes with people in recovery from sex addiction, and in that case, it's often not personal at all. Just like someone being an alcoholic or addicted to gambling isn't personal.
Oh, right.
So it could be so many things. Some people choose to work on their relationship and come back from it, and some people don't.
You mentioned sex addiction too.
Yeah.
I think there's also a misconception on what that is. Like okay, we know what addiction looks like, but can you kind of explain what sex addiction is? Because again, we never learn these things. Like, I don't know.
There's sex addiction, porn addiction, and love addiction. And something all addictions have in common is their compulsive behaviors. They're escalatory, and that means you need more and more to get the same hit. And the person does not want to be doing them. The person is trying and unable to stop. The person is suffering while they are doing this. Right?
Wow.
So if you can imagine porn addiction as an equivalent to alcohol, right? An alcoholic might wake up in the morning and say, okay, that's it. I'm sober today. I'm not drinking anymore, right? And then they like walk by a bar and they get a craving. And then they have a bad day at work and that they have a craving, and that their willpower over time is sort of no longer a match for this addiction if they don't have other support like 12-step or therapist or community. And so they end up doing something they don't want to do, and then they feel shame and guilt after. And then they swear to themselves, like, I'm never doing that again. And like porn addiction is sort of the same way, except you can imagine an alcoholic has to carry a flask in their pocket at all times. Like with cell phones, like you always have access to this thing you're trying to stop and do. So like not everybody who goes to strip clubs or goes to see sex workers is a sex addict. Not everyone who cheats on their partner is a sex addict. But if someone is repeatedly doing something incongruent with their values, or desperately trying to stop and they're unsuccessful to stop on their own, then sometimes you're looking at sex addiction. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, that's good to know. I mean, that's a different, that's a whole different world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. But looking at sex now on the opposite spectrum, right? It's something that's so enjoyable.
Right. What
are some of the benefits of just having sex that are enjoyable with a loving partner that you're in love with?
Totally. In Legally Blonde, I don't know if you remember this, but Elle Woods, there's like someone on trial for murder of her husband, but she's also like a fitness instructor.
Yes.
And Elle is like, no, she exercises. Exercise gives you endorphins. Endorphins people do not kill their husbands.
I remember that scene.
But there's absolutely like endorphins, oxytocin, which is like the cuddle hormone that brings you a feeling of like connection, intimacy, bonding. It can be great exercise. And for many people, their sexuality is a part of them, right? Like if you think of intellectual intimacy, the ability to have like a nuanced conversation like we're having here today, right? Like my life would feel quite empty without getting to express that part of myself, have that kind of connection with another human being, right? This intellectual intimacy.
It's like expressing your spirituality almost.
Expressing a part of you. Some people can have quite spiritual sex, and that can be through tantra, that can be through psychedelics, we were talking about earlier, that can be through setting an intention with your partner before you have sex of like, let's explore the masculine and feminine energy and how those intersect and the dance between those things. We'll find that
so. And wait, can we talk about that? Yeah. What does that mean?
Yeah. There could be like a societal or a cultural belief that all men have masculine energy and all women have female energy.
Of course, yeah.
That doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Traditionally, a masculine energy is more of an observing energy, and a feminine energy is more of an experiencing energy.
Oh, right. It's where the female is almost like dancing for the man kind of thing. And
to observe.
Observe, exactly.
Yes.
So how does that correlate then in
like
sex?
How could that show up in sex?
Yeah.
Right? That could show up as the man being sort of the giver and creating an experience for the woman. For the woman to have the confidence and the empowerment and the embodiment to experience it out loud.
That's so cool.
Yeah. It could
I love that
vocalizing,
theory.
But it doesn't have to be vocalizing. It's just to embody her experience and for him to have the privilege to witness it.
That's actually a really interesting subject as I'm learning about it right now with you, because we all have this yin and yang.
Yeah.
And in a relationship too, men predominantly have the masculine, females predominantly have the feminine, and sometimes when there is a little bit of conflict in the relationship, it can be because the roles have been swapped. You know, the man might have more of the feminine and the female more of the masculine. And so thinking about how can the man hone that masculine energy more in the bedroom, and how can the woman hone more of that feminine energy in the bedroom? Because as you discussed, yes, it's that man that's taking charge. But if that man typically has not or doesn't know what to do, right? Like, how does one even get into that mindset? And as we talked about earlier too, is it what you do throughout in the beginning of the day that leads into what happens in the bedroom?
Yeah, it absolutely can be. We might be able to borrow some from sort of the BDSM community that plays with dominance and submission. It might be a myth that sort of the dominant does whatever they want for their own pleasure and the submissive just sort of takes it. And in reality, that's often not the case. That the scene or the experience is designed for what is exciting or healing or what turns on the submissive, and the dominant creates that world or that experience for them.
Yeah.
And there's sort of different roles a dominant and a submissive could take. So there's like a pleasure dom who kind of tortures their submissive by giving as much pleasure as they can possibly take. There's sort of a daddy dom that maybe is encouraging and maybe is almost like coaching or cheerleading and is like maybe giving tasks or assignments for their submissive and then giving them like reward and praise and maybe sometimes light punishment for that. There's sort of a master and slave dynamic that can be a little bit more like intense or cold or punishing. So there's so many ways to be a dominant or be in a masculine energy. But I don't think it means someone has to step into what they've seen in like media or TV or what they assume to be masculine. The thing we come back to with sex all the time is like it's going to be different for every person and every couple because it has to be authentic to you. Like, what is your authentic masculine energy, and it is that caretaking and nurturing, and that can be masculine too.
That's beautiful. How do you, when you're working with clients, how do you inspire or empower your clients to be more explorative or to be there more for one another? Because I can imagine, well, yes, we can hear these things, we understand, yes. How do you actually, how would you, for example, help Casey and I, or work with us to say, hey, here's what I think could be great for you to learn your own ways of how you best enjoy being with each other in the bedroom?
There's a few things you can do. One is each person thinks through 3 kind of like perfect, best, ideal, most enjoyable, most pleasurable sexual experiences they've already had. You don't have to share that with your partner. It may or may not involve your partner, but you use those 3 stories to look through and see what are the elements that are common denominators to all of these things. And then maybe I share that. I want to incorporate those things. The next one is imagining like a mirror of desire. So if you've seen Harry Potter, there's that mirror of desire. Harry looks in the mirror, he sees his parents. He's like, Ron, come look at my parents. And Ron looks in and he's like holding the cup because he wins a Quidditch match. And anyone who looks in the mirror sees like what they most desire. So if you imagine looking in that mirror and seeing an ideal sexual fantasy, then you can think through what really makes this so ideal. There's a yes, no, maybe list that you can like Google. And
I like that.
online. And so each person takes it separately, and it's a list of 100 things. I mean, some of them you might look at and you'd be like, I did not even know people do that. And so you write like, yes, I'm for sure interested in that. Oh my God, no, I would never touch that. And like, maybe. And this can be a way for people to find sort of their overlap that they might have not even known that they had.
That's a great, yes.
Yeah, a yes, no, maybe list.
That's a great idea. That kind of refers back to like, what's your sexual blueprint?
Yeah.
How do we know how to cross the bridge? That's a really cool exercise. Yeah. What are some of the absolute no-nos? Like, do not bring this up in the bedroom. It might be obvious to some, but I mean, for example, when you just said, think about the times that you really enjoyed most in, sex, whether it was with your partner or not, maybe someone else. You don't need to bring up the person's name, but you can bring up the elements. Like, you probably don't want to say, my best sex life was with my ex. You probably don't want to say that. Like, what are maybe some not so obvious no-nos that
things not to do or not to say? That's a good question. One thing I will say is like, when you poll women on like what they're looking for in a man, most say a sense of humor. Like they want someone who makes them laugh. And then that sense of humor can sometimes be turned on them, where this funny guy who is making fun of everybody else and you found so charming sometimes also uses humor to deflect when a moment is getting too serious, or kind of like teases you. And if we're going to have these conversations that feel so vulnerable, of a yes, no, maybe list, for example. Like,
great, yeah.
You don't yuck someone's yum. And what I mean by that is like, someone might think it's like a cute, fun, silly quiz to go through and be like, oh my God, you're into that? That's crazy. And like, they think it's fun and funny and playful. But what it's really doing is teaching your partner, like, you're not a safe person to talk to about intimate and vulnerable things.
Interesting, right?
And that they shouldn't tell you the craziest things they want or need or imagine, because they're not going to be received. They're going to be rejected. So like making fun of them is a big no-no. Same with like sexual functioning. Like if somebody struggles with pain with sex or premature ejaculation, delayed ejaculation, like don't mock that person.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't think someone's like trying to be cruel, making fun of them. It's a way to think like, oh, I'm taking some like intensity out of the room, but like making fun of somebody's body for how it sexually functions.
Yeah.
So deeply hurtful.
That's a great point, right? Someone just thinks they're being funny, but really you're giving a cue I probably shouldn't have told you this, and I probably won't tell you more things.
Exactly. You probably can't trust me.
You brought up sexual dysfunction, and I know that sexual dysfunction covers a range of things. It's not just like erectile dysfunction. It, like you said, it can be the female, it hurts to have intercourse, which I know, I don't remember the exact statistic, but I do know that there is one, that like a good percentage that find sex not pleasurable.
Yeah.
Where does that usually come from? Why is that? Like, aren't we supposed to have intercourse? And okay, also then, why is the clit not there?
Right.
You know? And then, so what's the disconnect? What's the connection? Yeah. Help me understand this.
Okay, amazing questions. One thing is, yes, the clitoris is external. It also extends internal, sort of like a shoe, horseshoe. Mm-hmm. But that only happens with arousal. It's sort of like how blood flow is required for a person with a penis to get an erection. Mm-hmm. Blood flow is required for like sensation to be felt on the internal portion of the clitoris.
So no arousal, you're not going to feel good over there.
You're not going to feel anything in there. Yeah, so that could be one thing.
Yeah.
Sexual trauma could be a reason that a person develops vaginismus, which is like a guarding of the vagina. So when something tries to penetrate, even like a finger or a tampon, the body might say like, no, I'm not going to let that inside. But so many kind of like vaginal pain conditions are hormonally mediated. So like 1 in 5 women who take oral birth control are going to develop painful sex at some point.
Really?
Yeah.
No matter how long you took birth control?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And the reason for that is that the tissue of the vagina requires these hormones of estrogen and testosterone and like the right balance of them to have enough blood flow. And so when the tissue is irritated, you can imagine that friction on irritated tissue doesn't feel good. People who take hormones like spironolactone for acne could also develop these sort of like irritation conditions. So there's so many reasons. Pelvic floor dysfunction. Some people carry tension in their pelvic floor the way someone might carry tension in their neck or shoulder. And if it goes unaddressed,
that's interesting. I feel like I have so many girlfriends that don't really find sex enjoyable. And I feel like I have more girlfriends than not that don't find it enjoyable because of pain, or it's just, it doesn't feel that great. So like you said, there could be
so many reasons.
Amount of issues. And it's not just about down there. It's about what's going on in your life, what's going on in your body, what has happened. What are some of the ways that someone can at least try to explore? Or as you mentioned, like if there's no arousal, well, then there's no blood flow, and no blood flow, it's not going to feel good.
Yeah.
So how can someone at least do their best to make sure that they are trying to get the blood flow and working on that? If they have this understanding of, oh no, it could hurt.
Something's not right. It could hurt. Yeah. So sort of a way to figure out if something is most likely psychological or most likely medical is, does it happen every time or does it only happen with a partner? So like if you were to have some sort of toy for internal stimulation, if you're able to relax enough to use that, and that could be pleasurable. But if you're having sex with a partner, it only hurts. Now we know there could be something's happening with the partner. Either like the way you're having sex, not enough lubrication, or something like psychosocial, preventing vulnerability with the partner, right? So that's like a good rule out.
Yeah.
Things that people can do, they can read erotica to explore the themes that they find most arousing. And they can engage in self-pleasure, masturbation.
And learn.
Yeah.
Okay.
If we believe the human body has been designed by a creator, it's been designed with hands that can reach a person's own genitals. Why might that be? Right? It could be
interesting. Yeah.
Masturbation is a birthright.
That's such a fascinating concept still to me. And I don't know how I haven't made that connection, because I actually kind of really thought of sex as sex is to make babies.
Right.
That is what I've always just,
Yeah.
it's not to just have pleasure.
Right.
Yes. Okay. You want to be having pleasure while you're making a baby. That would make sense.
Right.
But I didn't think about it at all beyond that. Although obviously, yes, I'm sure I should have, but still, right? Because we learn that in school.
That's how
So that's all
so
you know.
many of us are socialized, is
Yeah.
to believe. And for some reason, people raised as female are socialized to believe this the most, that like sex is not for their pleasure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember having the sex talk when I was younger, and I'm just like, yeah, no, don't worry, Mom. I don't want this. Like, I got so scared of it.
Right. Why would I want it?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And I think that preconditioning really does, it's who we are today. Like, how can one unlearn? I know we've gone over so many tactics and tools and exploration with yourself, but it's like, how, for example, working with you, like, how do you unlearn some of these things? Like, is it purely just practice? Is it, how do you get out of your own way?
You could talk something out to death, but like the body has to like learn it.
The body, okay.
Yeah. And so the most effective way to heal like anything sexual is through your sexuality. And that's your sexual relationship with yourself or with your partner. So an example might be asking your partner to affirm you during sex.
Okay.
To say something like if you were raised to believe sex is not for your pleasure, then have them have a sexual session that's just about your pleasure, and have them say, like, you deserve this. This is all just for you. You do that enough times and the body starts to heal.
That's beautiful. Yeah. That's such a beautiful act, too, with partners. And I feel like that is what can deepen connections.
Sure.
What are some of the other ways that you see in relationships of, okay, I have gone from here to like the most abundant, beautiful love. Here are the most common things that I've noticed that have helped these couples just like fall back into that
love.
Yeah.
Yeah. In early dating, so much of sex can be motivated by plot. And what I mean by that is like someone asks you to be their girlfriend and now you're feeling so connected. And then the sex you have is like romantic, right? There's like, and in later dating, there's not as much plot. And so you can do things to sort of mimic plot. Like the New York Times has 36 questions to fall in love. And then at the end, you make eye contact for 3 minutes, right? 3 minutes is a long time.
Yeah.
Like if you carve out a romantic evening to do that and like connect emotionally together, the sensuality and the sex after that is going to be so much deeper. Other things that couples can do is really make time to connect on a regular basis.
Like genuinely putting in a calendar invite?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it doesn't mean to have to mean scheduling sex. You're not obligated to have sex during that time, but this is time we spend together with no devices, with nothing that we're rushing or racing to do after.
Love that.
And this is just time for like the two of us. And like more often than not, if you're alone and relaxed and being nice and kind and fun together, like sex kind of does naturally ensue from that.
I love that. Yeah. I also think there's I don't know exactly what to call it, but there's so many females that feel like when they're, because of their uncomfortableness sometimes with sex, or not even, but because let's say a partner goes to kiss them or grab their waist, they think it's going to lead to sex, so they say no.
Yeah.
Right? That's something that I think, I mean, I've dealt with that before, and I don't know where that. Yeah, I don't know where that comes from, but it's interesting because you shouldn't have to say no to your partner for grabbing you, getting scared that now you're going to have sex.
Right. But women are sort of socialized to believe, I feel like the term blue ball has sort of like created this pressure.
Yeah.
That you reach a point of no return where like after which you're almost like a tease if you don't agree to have sex with your partner, or like there can be so much like learning that comes with that. There's 5 gears to physical touch. So if you think of gear 1 as like something you would do in front of your grandma, like holding hands on a couch, right? Fully clothed. And gear 5 being penetration. There's like so many gears in between, right? There's like naked, sensual touch, like taking a shower together and like soaping each other. There's like playful touch, like playing naked twister, like strip poker or something like silly, right? And then there's like maybe genital touching that doesn't have to escalate to intercourse. And then there's intercourse. And like each of these gears are worthwhile in their own right. So if you have a partner who is like so nervous every time you wrap your arms around them, you can say something really, really reassuring, like, hey, do you want to take a shower together? I'm not trying to have sex with you. I just want to take a shower.
Love that. Yeah. That's very helpful. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of people that do deal with that. I listened to a podcast that said just simply kiss your partner 3 times every single night before you go to bed, or at least hold the kiss. I think it was like for 3 seconds or whatever it was. And that helps remove the need of like, I'm going to have sex with you now. If you're just purely kissing for X amount of seconds, which is interesting. Do you find that also? Do you also find that it's like, for example, you wake up in the morning. That's when you're in your alpha state still. You're not in this beta, talking, chaotic state. Whereas when you go to bed, yes, of course you want to go back into the alpha state, but it can be hard for humans in this culture that we live on that's like go, 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 to wind down and relax. Do you find that for a couple that is having, the struggle to really build back up that sexual intimacy, morning time might be the best to try? Or like what is your opinion on that or view?
Yeah, it depends on the couple.
Okay.
Something I hear a lot from women is that daytime or early in the morning is more when they are in the mood. And sometimes for men, where they're more in the mood is in the evening. And I don't know why that might be. But again, it's all about learning your ons and offs and communicating them with your partner. So if you're a low libido partner and your partner is a high libido partner and you like to do it in the morning and they're kind of game to do it all the time, maybe that's a way they can flex and like accommodate you. Some people's offs are like eating a huge meal. And so like they go out to date night and one partner sort of has the expectation of like, we'll go to dinner and then we'll have sex after. And the other person's so full after that meal, they like can't even imagine. They feel bloated and they just want to go right to sleep. So it's different for everyone. It all goes back again to like knowing yourself, communication.
Yeah. And I also think that goes back to also just like mindfulness with yourself, being aware and also wanting to work on that part with your partner. Because if you don't even pay attention to it, then no energy will get put towards it.
For sure.
And then you'll still continue to have that issue.
People think that a sex life should come easy. Where people who love their careers, they put energy into their careers. People who have healthy bodies, they put energy into their body. If you want a sex life that you love, you have to put energy and thoughtfulness into your sex life.
So well said. So well said. There needs to be more conversations like this about sex because like you said, it's a part of your life. It's a part of the pie. And so imagine just never having your pie full. Right. What does that do to the other parts?
Yeah.
Right? Like how does a bad sex life negatively affect, right, the rest of your life? Does it actually negatively affect or is that a misconception?
That's an interesting question.
Like could it be, I mean, I'm sure maybe it's up to each person, but if you're having a bad sex life and you're perceiving it that way, does that result in divorce? Does that result in higher chances of, who knows what?
I don't know statistics on that.
Right.
I think of sexual health as a part of self-care. And that's where like masturbation can come in and supplement if you don't have access to like have that being met with a partner, right? But like the masturbation that I think leads to like spiritual growth and mental and emotional growth is not like dissociating and zoning out to pornography. It's being in touch with yourself, perhaps your fantasy, your imagination, and being like, present in your body.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know like the divorce rates of people who aren't satisfied with their sex life. I can imagine.
Right.
I can't help.
Yeah, I feel as though, you want a whole pie. You want the whole pie.
I would.
I don't want to miss a piece. Come on. So for someone that's looking to just improve their sex life, maybe they have a good sex life, they want to improve it. What are some things that they can do to just like pick it up a notch?
Totally. Such a good question. I truly believe reading erotica is such an important way to like spark imagination and creativity.
And what is reading erotica exactly? Like, are those stories? Are those like...
Yeah, erotica could be short stories. They could be a whole book. But these are sexually explicit stories with plot.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll have different...
With plot.
Mm-hmm. And they'll have different themes and different dynamics and different acts. And it's a way to discover a part of yourself you might have not necessarily known about before. And this really isn't to like hate on pornography or come out against pornography. The brain isn't really designed to understand that pornography is fictional. Mm-hmm. And it can be such an intense dopamine rush that something can feel arousing, even if it's not necessarily in your arousal template or something that is like authentically true to your sexual expression, versus reading something that requires like imagination. You're more likely to be excited by things that are a bigger fit for you. I think if a couple has not already explored like some sort of power exchange, and by that I mean some role playing with like domination and submission, I think there can be a spiritual element to that. I think it can be really exciting. In general, we know like polarity and contrast is an intensifier, right? It heightens experiences in general. You have a salty snack and then the sweet snack tastes even sweeter, right? So playing with like polarity can be interesting. And I'm a huge fan of like sex toys, sexual aids. Like you don't know what sensation is going to feel good for you until you try. And that can be sort of like a soft paddle, that can be restraints, that can be vibrators or cock rings, or even gentler restraints, like sort of silky ties that you could sort of get out of if you wanted to, and it's psychological. But really, it's like get vulnerable with your partner today. Like find something you're curious about and then be brave and vulnerable enough to share it. That's it.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So beautiful. Thank you so much, Leona.
Jacqueline.
This has been incredible for everyone looking just to learn more information about sex health, sex therapy. Do you have any resources or things that you could point out? And I can always attach them below as well.
Yeah, we've mentioned some really great books today. Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski is a great one. Sex Made Simple is a really good one. And then Healing Sex by Stacey Haynes for anyone who maybe has had some sexual trauma and is sort of on a healing journey. And then in terms of toys, Adam and Eve is a great resource to sort of get creative and see what's out there.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining me.
Jacqueline.
Today has been incredible. I hope you guys have all enjoyed as well. I will see you next time.